Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Addendum. Not a things I'd like to see, but just a topic I wish to discuss. Specifically, there's recently been a lot of talk about the Panzer III. Well, generally, there's been for some time talk about adding a Panzer III to the Wehrmacht, either doctrinally or even non-doctrinally, in which case most people suggest around Tier 2. And initially, for some time, I even thought, that sounds kind of cool. Stuarts, T-70s, it would be really nice to have some kind of counter to that more directly. And then, of course, it rather struck me, hey, hang on a moment, all we're doing is just homogenizing the factions or mirroring them by just giving the Wehrmacht, what the other factions have. And then I realized that's bad. That's what happened to the Americans. That's how they got the mortar, because everybody's supposed to have a mortar, right? Oh, hang on, right. And that's all the problem there, sort of realized with the Wehrmacht Panzer III idea in particular, since it just seems to be, counter there. It's just, it doesn't quite add up when you really think about it, and doesn't really add anything there, particularly because then it's also going to challenge out the Puma, which is something the Wehrmacht already has. Doctrinally, how are you going to defend it in the Panzer III and the Puma? Just an example. But more further on, it's not saying it's going to be uncounterable, not like saying the mortar, which is a lot more tricky to deal with for the Wehrmacht comparatively. Again, the Allies have a ton of light anti-tank, so it's not like, couldn't, imagine it, not being added at all. Again, bazookas, Piats, anti-tank guns everywhere. And, of course, guards from the PTRSs, conscripts with the PTRSs, and so on. So it's not like it'll be completely unstoppable as long as it's done correctly. But again, the question would be, how would you do it? Because, again, you can't just say this should be, just something to kind of like tanks. No, that doesn't make sense. They'd just make another light tank, in a sense, just to counter other light tanks. And again, homogenization. If you were to do it, you'd have to do it properly. You'd have to say, all right, the Panzer III was a medium tank, so, we're adding another medium tank, guess, in Tier 2, because otherwise you're not just going to fit it in again. Otherwise, why would you choose a Panzer III, for example, or a Panzer IV, Stug, or Ostwind? You have to do it in Tier 2, and then you have to price it properly, which means you have to price it roughly around the area of a Panzer IV, or a Sherman, or a Cromwell, because otherwise it would just be too cheap, too easy to go for, with no real consequences of getting in the first place. You have to do it reasonably expensive. At the same time, just have to be, in most cases, worse than the Panzer IV. Worse AoE, penetration, damage, armor, health, maybe better speed, maybe slightly better rate of fire, but overall, at many levels, it had to be worse than a Panzer IV. Still better than the other bits, but overall, it shouldn't even be able to really take on a T-34-76 head on. So, already maybe sort of moving into some pretty interesting territory when you think about it, really. It really has such a narrow space to work on, and you also have to make it expensive. And then the question becomes, can you then really make it work further on? And then, of course, at the same time, you then have to ensure it doesn't infringe on the Wehrmacht Puma calling as well. So even there it becomes, a bit further trickier. So, there's a lot there to actually keep in mind when you think about it, really, the idea of a Panzer III in a game, because it can really just end up causing a lot more trouble, than it actually solves, and more problems than it solves. Because, again, it's just suddenly adding in a medium tank in some spot where there generally never is anyone, and you have to sort of balance it correctly so it, becomes useful, but not too useful, nor does it, sort of overpower other units. And then, of course, the question also becomes, how and will people then use it even properly then? And further on, would it really fit into the Wehrmacht's style of play? Then you pretty much have a sort of play of, medium tank for every tier, except, Wehrmacht Tier 4 is kind of rubbish with its Panther, and then you have the Panzer IV, which is sort of right, though again you question sort of how much you're getting out of it. And then you all of a sudden have, Panzer III in Tier 2, but at the same time, you have to question how much you got out of worth of that, because again, it can't be too cheap, but not too expensive. Yet again, it can't be too good. So it have to be, medium tank. You sort of try to use to get an early game advantage, and even then, it just sort of strikes me as odd, because then it just seems like, and to a certain extent, a bit like the Steward is a no-brainer, a bit like calling in a Stoogie, when you're doing poorly. So further on, then you'd actually have to sort of overhaul the Wehrmacht, sort of add, choices for like every tier, in a sense of, further create sort of a device in terms of mechanics where it can then fit in a Panzer III, where then force the player to actually make choices. Then, of course, the question becomes, well, what are you then going to balance the Panzer III off with? Is it the Pak 40? Is it the half track, the 222, the Panzer Grenadiers? Why and when it then becomes a bit more, oh Lord, right? I mean, what are you sort of going to balance it off with? What is going to be a worthy trade-off? But again, you're then sort of further making things tricky. It's going to be the Pak 40. I mean, you could say with the half track, but you're pretty sure most people are just going to, in a heartbeat, go for the half track. Oh, not the half track, obviously. Not the half track, never the half track, considering how many people use half tracks, which, besides me, is an extreme minority, and that minority mostly uses it for flamethrowers. I mean, most people are just going to go Panzer III, duh. 222s, again, considering how most people use the 222, I mean, again, it would be better to just fix that. I mean, they're probably just going to go, for the Panzer III again. So it'd really have to be the Pak 40, and even then you're going to get people like, why do I have to choose? Because, again, for some reason, some people just want it all. Again, that's how we get the current state of the Americans. They want everything. They can't stand to, have a gap. They have to sort of fill out by using their units creatively or using what they actually got. And again, that's also the other problem. Again, we're sort of creating this situation there where Wehrmacht's supposed to, have the same solution in the same toolbox for every problem rather than trying to figure out what works. And again, the problem is currently for the Wehrmacht, the tools don't work very well. They need to be strengthened, but I don't think we should necessarily just throw more tools at them to solve something. So again, it's sort of creates an interesting spot there. I mean, what do you do? How do you do it? And that's basically why I'm at this point, thinking, initially, yes, the Panzer III, great idea. Now that I'm thinking more about it, in fact, even as I'm talking about it, I'm sort of more realizing, is there actually any way to sort of add the Panzer III without necessarily having to redo the entire Wehrmacht from scratch? Because that's essentially what you'd have to do. And the problem is, again, for 1944-45 army, the Panzer III was basically sort of, a training unit sort of thing. There was most sort of training units that was forced to rush their tanks to the front line here and there. I mean, they saw usage, but it was not sort of as part of an actual organization. So even then, it also becomes a bit stranger that way. And how do you then reflect, its sort of training nature to give it worse veterancy bonuses or worse performance until it gives, also sort of decent veterancy? Perhaps you could sort of factor that in. Maybe you sort of, choose between certain things and you get, worse version of units if you go for the Panzer III, whereas if you sort of go for something else, you just get sort of stronger at the rest of the units. Possibilities there as well. And again, that's sort of, well, the tricky part, really. I mean, had it been sort of the old company's one Wehrmacht, you could probably stick it in there to the sort of tier 3 there, with the heavy armored car, the Stug, Nebelwehr for officer. No problem, we'll probably be able to better fit in. But the current sort of Wehrmacht setup, it doesn't really work. I mean, doctrinally, but then it just, is another Stug, another Puma, another, well, that really, and it's just going to be, another crutch, in a sense, on tie to tech. And then again, maybe tier 2, but then again, you'd have to actually add limits to when you can then sort of build it, which I don't think the system can, or at least doesn't do. Otherwise, you'd have to move to like tier 3. And again, why use it then there? I mean, it sort of creates a whole slew of issues in a sense there, if you will. And again, I'm not saying it's impossible, but really thinking hard about it, I just can't see an easy solution for adding a Panzer III that immediately makes sense in game. I mean, I could probably more easily see an idea for adding in, I don't know, the Hetzer somehow than the Panzer III, to put it simply. So, I mean, again, while the Panzer III is sort of, in a sense, an iconic unit, it's just not really for the 1944-45 era in the current companies, too. I mean, it really just has to change a lot of things, I think, to be able to fit in the Panzer III reasonably well. Whereas with the Hetzer, you could sort of fact some things, then it could probably fit in quite nicely. It's sort of a lighter Stug, which essentially was less armor on the sides, slope armor on the front, but still less armor thickness there as well, and some other bits. In theory, you could sort of consider like a Stug light for tier 2, a bit expensive, but it could work. It could work comparatively to the Panzer III, because again, it's an assault gun, which does require a bit more expertise for most players to sort of half decently use. So I mean, there's that, I suppose, but again, I don't know, I don't really think it should be easily fitted in or make sense. And for the Oberkommando West, You might have a better chance of fitting it in there, but it's not really the ones that are screaming for the Panzer III there, it's for the Wehrmacht, because again, that's just that huge gap currently in Tier 2 and Tier 1, sort of where, the Americans can just rush for the Stuart faster, the Serbs can rush for the T-70 faster, and just really give the Wehrmacht a beat down, which I think overall just more signal they need to nerf the Stuart and the T-70 and slightly fix up the 222, sort of having a bit more effect. And again, overall Wehrmacht Tier 1 and Tier 2 a bit more, usefully. And finally, also do something about Wehrmacht Tier 4. Again, the idea there could maybe also be throwing in an infantry unit Tier 4, a bit like the old Wehrmacht, which again would sort of make up for some weaknesses. But again, overall, I would rather say, don't add a Panzer III, rather sort out the rest of the Wehrmacht. But again, I've seen so much talk about the Wehrmacht having a Panzer III, and I've also thought a lot about it again, and for a long time I thought, again, great. But, once I really got to thinking about it, I realized that's going to be a really tricky idea to actually perform. I mean, honestly, if they were to sort of expend resources on a unit, I'd rather see, add the Nassau and throw out the Elephant, replace that, or Flak Panzer Gepard, or anything else really than a Panzer III, to be honest. So there's that. So there you go, a bit more of a sort of thoughtful monologue on the concept of Panzer III and adding it, and I think it's going to be really tricky, if not really, really, really tricky and not very feasible to sort of add a Panzer III. I'm not going to try to completely ruin your dreams, just sort of try and highlight it's not going to be easy, and it could easily end up causing a lot more trouble than it ends up adding. And of course, again, it just seems like more of a cry because the overall solution, again, is much deeper. But again, most people don't see that far. They just see there's a gap there. They look at the enemy, what's causing the problem. So, the solution is we get the same thing, which is, again, just homogenizing and mirroring, and which is essentially kind of what got us here in the first place. Again, the Americans did it, and they got it. And now everything's not really fun for the Wehrmacht, which really wasn't, but it only got worse. So there you go again. Hopefully you've sort of enjoyed this, learned something from it, gotten some of your own thoughts on the matter. Do, of course, sign off in the comments and so on. This is Imperial Name signing off, and again, hope you enjoyed this. Cheers.